The sleek lobby of Orion Technologies gleamed under the fluorescent lights, but the atmosphere was tense. Richard Calloway, the towering CEO, stood with arms crossed, his face twisted in disdain as two security guards held Daniel Brooks by the arms. "This man doesn't belong here," Calloway sneered. "Arrest him. Let him learn his place." Daniel kept his composure, though his heart pounded. He had done nothing wrong, only emptied trash bins and polished the marble floors. Yet in the CEO's eyes, he was invisible, disposable. Before the guards could move, the heavy glass doors swung open. A man in a dark suit strode in, his presence commanding the entire room. Director Samuel Brooks. His voice was calm, but it cut like steel. "Unhand my son, now." Calloway froze, color draining from his face. The janitor he had mocked was the son of the FBI director. The balance of power shifted in an instant. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." The sound of a vacuum hummed softly as Daniel Brooks moved methodically across the 12th floor offices of Orion Technologies. The building was a palace of glass and steel, its marble floors polished to a mirror's shine. To the executives who walked its halls during the day, it symbolized wealth and innovation. But for Daniel, it was simply his workplace, the place he cleaned every night while others slept. At 26, Daniel wasn't the typical janitor. He had a bachelor's degree in criminology, dreams of pursuing graduate school, and a sharp mind that noticed details most people overlooked. But after his mother's illness and mounting bills, he had taken this job to keep his family afloat each night. Dressed in his gray Orion janitorial uniform, he pushed his cart down the long corridors, quietly observing the traces of the powerful. Empty espresso cups left on mahogany desks, half-written notes abandoned in boardrooms, discarded memos about mergers worth billions. To the executives, Daniel was invisible. To him, their carelessness revealed a world of unchecked privilege. Still, Daniel never complained. He worked with quiet dignity, earning respect from his fellow staff. In the break room, Derek Moore, the older janitor who had taken Daniel under his wing, leaned back in his chair and chuckled. "You know, kid, you work too fast. Slow down a little. Make 'em think you're working hard by working long, not smart." Daniel grinned, shaking his head. "That's your philosophy, Derek, not mine. I'd rather do it right the first time." Derek sipped his coffee, studying the younger man with a fatherly eye. "You've got that look, Daniel. Like you're not meant to be here forever. Like this is just a stop along the way," Daniel shrugged. "Maybe, but right now, this pays the bills." What Daniel didn't say was that his father, Director Samuel Brooks, had insisted on it. Samuel, despite his towering position as head of the FBI, had raised his son with humility. "Power means nothing if you can't understand the people who live without it," he often told him. Daniel had grown up hearing stories of justice, integrity, and sacrifice. His father believed working at the bottom was as important a lesson as any Ivy League education, and Daniel had taken that lesson to heart. Among the night staff, Daniel was known for his kindness. He always stayed late to help Elena Martinez, the office assistant who often worked overtime. He shared meals with Derek, even when Derek insisted he didn't need charity. He even once walked a nervous intern to her car after midnight, sensing her unease in the dark parking garage. To them, Daniel wasn't just a janitor. He was a friend. But to Richard Calloway, the CEO, Daniel was little more than background noise. Richard Calloway was a man obsessed with image. Tall, broad-shouldered, and perpetually dressed in tailored suits, he exuded arrogance. Under his leadership, Orion Technologies had grown into one of the largest firms in the country, but his ego had grown larger still. To Richard, the company was his kingdom. The executives were his nobility. And the janitors, secretaries, and assistants were peasants, useful only when silent. It was this world view that would soon collide violently with Daniel's quiet dignity. One Friday evening, Daniel arrived early, pushing his cart through the lobby as executives trickled out. He nodded politely to each of them, but most didn't bother to return the gesture. Only Eleanor paused. "Hey, Daniel, long night?" "Always," he said with a smile. She grinned. "At least you're always smiling. Makes this place less cold," Daniel shrugged. "Somebody has to." She waved as she left, leaving Daniel alone with the echo of his footsteps. He didn't notice the sharp eyes watching him from the mezzanine above. Richard Calloway had stayed late that night, preparing for a weekend retreat with investors. When he saw Daniel moving through the lobby, polishing the marble floors, something about the young man's composure irritated him. In Richard's world, janitors were supposed to be meek, head down, invisible. But Daniel carried himself differently, calm, upright, almost regal. It gnawed at Richard. Who was this janitor to walk like he belonged? Later that night, Derek found Daniel in the break room again, wiping down a counter. "You hear about the layoffs?" Derek asked grimly. Daniel frowned. "No, who?" "Security team's been talking. Word is, Calloway wants to cut staff. Guess who's first to go? Folks like us." Daniel's jaw tightened. "We keep this place running, and we're the first to get tossed aside." Derek nodded. "That's how it's always been. But you're different. You've got something in you. Don't let this place crush it." Daniel smiled faintly, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of frustration. "Don't worry, Derek. I know who I am." What he didn't say was that if Calloway ever pushed him too far, he wasn't alone. His father's shadow was long, and though Daniel never flaunted it, he knew the weight of the name, Brooks. For now, though, he kept it buried. He wanted to live by his own merit, not his father's title. He wanted to be seen for his character, not his bloodline. But that resolve would soon be tested, because Richard Calloway's disdain was about to erupt into open hostility. And when it did, Daniel's secret would come crashing into the open in a way that would shake Orion Technologies to its core. Friday nights at Orion Technologies were usually quiet after 9 o'clock. The last of the executives trickled out with their briefcases and polished shoes, leaving only the glow of desk lamps and the hum of cleaning machines. For Daniel Brooks, it was the calmest part of his shift, a time when he could move through the glass-walled corridors without interruption, wiping down surfaces and emptying trash bins in peace. That night, however, peace was fleeting. Daniel was dusting the long conference table on the top floor when he heard footsteps echoing in the hall. He glanced up to see Richard Calloway himself striding toward the room, his expensive leather shoes clicking against the marble floor. Calloway rarely worked this late, and when he did, he ignored janitorial staff entirely. But tonight his eyes locked on Daniel. "What are you doing in here?" Calloway demanded, his tone sharp. Daniel set the rag down, maintaining his composure. "Just cleaning up, sir. Making sure everything's ready for the Monday meeting." Calloway's lip curled. "Don't call me sir. You people always think a little respect makes you equal. This is my conference room, not your playground." Daniel blinked, taken aback. "I wasn't—" "Don't talk back," Calloway snapped, stepping closer. His voice dripped with disdain. "I've seen the way you walk around here. Like you belong. Like you're one of us. But you're not. You're a janitor. You're here to scrub floors and disappear." Daniel swallowed hard, forcing himself to stay calm. "With respect, Mr. Calloway, I'm just doing my job. That's all." But Calloway wasn't interested in reason. His irritation grew the more Daniel remained poised. To him, Daniel's composure was defiance. Minutes later, Elena Martinez appeared at the doorway, carrying a stack of files she needed to deliver before leaving. She froze at the sight of the CEO towering over Daniel, his face red with anger. "Is everything okay?" she asked cautiously. Calloway turned on her with a glare. "Get out. This doesn't concern you." Elena's instinct told her otherwise. She lingered, her eyes darting to Daniel, silently offering support. Calloway caught the exchange and sneered. "See, even the assistants think you deserve sympathy. Pathetic." He pulled out his phone and barked into it. "Chad, get up here, now!" Moments later, Chadwick Granger, the head of corporate security, stormed into the room. Stocky, broad-shouldered, and eager to prove his loyalty, he looked from Calloway to Daniel, then to Elena. "What's going on, Mr. Calloway?" Calloway pointed at Daniel as if accusing him of a crime. "This man is trespassing. Arrest him. Have him removed from the building immediately," Elena gasped. "Trespassing? He's an employee." Daniel took a steady breath. "I've been assigned to this floor all month. You know that, Mr. Calloway," but Calloway's eyes burned with arrogance. "I don't care what your assignment is. I said get him out. People like him don't belong in my offices." The words hung heavy in the air. "People like him." Chad stepped forward, grabbing Daniel's arm roughly. "Let's go." Daniel resisted, not with force, but with dignity. "I haven't done anything wrong. I'm just trying to work." Elena rushed forward. "This is insane." "Mr. Calloway, he hasn't broken a single rule. You can't just—" "Silence!" Calloway roared. "You're just an assistant. Do you want to be unemployed by Monday?" Elena froze, fear and anger battling in her chest. As Chad tried to pull him toward the door, Daniel felt humiliation burn in his chest. He had been raised to respect authority, to work hard, to endure. But in this moment, he was treated like a criminal for daring to exist in a space the CEO deemed off limits. His thoughts flickered briefly to his father. Samuel Brooks had always taught him that injustice reveals character. "Stand tall," he had said, "even when others try to make you small." So Daniel did. He straightened his back, looked Calloway in the eye, and said, "You can order your guards to drag me out, but it won't change the truth. You're humiliating a man who's done nothing but his job." Calloway's face twisted with rage. "You think you can lecture me? You'll regret this. By the time I'm finished, you won't work in this city again." Eleanor's hands shook as she clutched the files to her chest. She wanted to scream, to stop what was happening, but fear held her tongue. Derek Moore's words echoed in her mind. He had often warned her about the cruelty of the upper ranks. "They'll break you if you let them." But Elena also knew this moment was bigger than fear. Quietly, she slipped her phone from her pocket and began recording. Chad pushed Daniel toward the elevators. "Move." Daniel glanced back once more at Calloway. The CEO stood smugly, arms folded, satisfied with his display of dominance. He had made his point. In his world, titles defined worth, and janitors had none. But Calloway didn't know who he was dealing with. Daniel stayed silent, but in his heart he knew this was only the beginning. Because while he refused to invoke his father's name for his own sake, there were limits to silence. And tonight, those limits had been crossed. As the elevator doors closed on him, Daniel heard Calloway's final words echo across the marble floor. "Arrest him. Make sure he never sets foot in this building again." Elena's phone caught it all, and soon the truth would catch up to Richard Calloway in ways he never imagined. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The security office at Orion Technologies was a small, windowless space tucked away on the basement floor, far removed from the gleaming towers above. The walls were lined with monitors streaming grainy footage of hallways and lobbies. It was here that Daniel Brooks found himself seated, hands cuffed behind the chair, under the watchful eyes of Chadwick Granger and 2 guards. He had done nothing wrong, yet the treatment was deliberate. Every gesture, every cold stare, every click of the handcuffs was meant to send a message. "You don't belong here." Chad paced slowly across the room, smirking. "You could have just kept your head down, Brooks. Clean your floors, empty your bins, and vanish like the rest of your kind. But no, you had to look the boss in the eye. You had to act like you're somebody." Daniel lifted his gaze, calm but unflinching. "I am somebody. A job doesn't change that." The smirk on Chad's face faltered for a split second before twisting into something crueler. "Save the speeches. You think anyone up there cares about what happens to you? You're disposable. Calloway wants you gone, and when he wants something, he gets it." Upstairs, in the executive suite, Richard Calloway leaned back in his leather chair, sipping from a crystal glass of scotch. Victoria Hale, his PR chief, sat across from him, her tablet glowing with news alerts. "You might have pushed this one a little far." Victoria said carefully. Nonsense, Calloway scoffed. He's a janitor. Who's going to believe his word against mine? Victoria hesitated. Elena Martinez was there. If she talks, she won't, Calloway interrupted, his voice dripping with arrogance. She's a low-level assistant who needs this job. Fear keeps people in line. Trust me, Victoria, I've been doing this long enough to know. Still, Victoria's sharp instincts told her something was off. There was a confidence in that janitor's posture she couldn't quite explain. He hadn't looked afraid, not the way others usually did when Calloway barked orders. Instead, he had looked resolute. Back in the basement, Elena wrestled with her conscience. She still had the recording, Calloway's order to arrest him. The temptation to delete it gnawed at her. She knew what crossing Calloway meant. Unemployment, blacklisting, maybe worse. But then she remembered Daniel's calm defiance, his refusal to bow his head, even as Calloway berated him. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't begged. He had simply stood tall. Elena opened her messages and saved the recording to a secure drive. Quietly, she texted Derek, "Meet me after shift. We need to talk about Daniel." Meanwhile, in the security office, Chad tried to press further. "You should count yourself lucky I don't have you thrown in jail. Calloway wanted you gone, but me? I'd like to see you behind bars." Daniel tilted his head. "For what crime?" Chad's grin widened. "Trespassing, theft, pick one. You think people will take your word over the CEOs? In this city, money talks louder than truth." The words were meant to break Daniel. Instead, they lit a fire in his chest. He thought of his father's lessons, of the countless times Samuel Brooks had told him that injustice thrives when good people remain silent. He would not give them the satisfaction of seeing him broken. Hours later, Calloway entered the security office himself, accompanied by Victoria. He dismissed the guards with a wave of his hand, leaving only Chad by his side. "Well," Calloway drawled, looking Daniel over like a specimen, "you've been quite the distraction tonight. A janitor who thinks he can lecture me in my own building. Tell me, Brooks, who do you think you are?" Daniel's response was measured, his voice steady. "I'm an employee who showed up to do his job." Calloway's laugh was harsh, echoing in the small room. "Wrong answer. You're nothing. You mop my floors, scrub my bathrooms, and fade into the background where you belong. That's all you'll ever be." Chad snorted in agreement, arms folded smugly. Victoria, however, studied Daniel more closely. Something about his composure unsettled her. Most people crumbled under Richard's tirades. This young man didn't. Instead, he radiated a quiet strength that felt out of place in this basement cell. "Here's what's going to happen," Calloway continued, leaning closer. "You're going to resign tonight, quietly. No severance, no complaints. If you don't, I'll have Chad here make sure the police file charges. I'm sure we can find something to pin on you. And if you dare go public with this nonsense, I'll ruin you. Understand?" Daniel met his gaze without flinching. "No, Mr. Calloway, I don't understand. Because you can't ruin what you don't control." The room fell silent. For the first time, Calloway blinked, caught off guard by the calm defiance. Victoria shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her instincts prickling sharper than before. She leaned toward Calloway. "Maybe we should just cut him loose, quietly. Too much noise could backfire," but Calloway's pride was too deep. "No," he snapped. "If I let one janitor defy me, what message does that send? He'll be made an example of." As Daniel was escorted out of the office and back to the basement cell, he caught Elena's eyes from across the hallway. She had lingered nearby, clutching her files tightly. Her gaze told him what he needed to know. She hadn't abandoned him. And somewhere deep inside, Daniel allowed himself a flicker of hope, for now he seemed powerless. Humiliated, dismissed, trapped in a web of lies spun by men drunk on power. But the truth had a way of surfacing, and when it did, Orion Technologies would never look the same again. Director Samuel Brooks had spent most of his life in the pursuit of justice. As head of the FBI, his name carried weight in Washington, whispered in reverence by allies and grudging respect by adversaries. But beyond the polished marble of government buildings and the constant hum of intelligence briefings, Samuel was simply a father, a father who had raised his son to value humility above titles and character above privilege. That Friday evening, Samuel was at home in his study, a steaming cup of black coffee beside him, reviewing classified reports on a cybercrime syndicate. His phone buzzed once, a text from Elena Martinez. He frowned. He didn't know her personally, but he recognized her name. Daniel had mentioned her once, describing her as one of the few kind souls at Orion. Curious. Samuel opened the message. Attached was a video. He pressed play, and the grainy recording sprang to life. Richard Calloway, the CEO of Orion Technologies, sneering across a polished conference room. "This man doesn't belong here. Arrest him. Let him learn his place." Samuel's jaw tightened as he watched Chadwick Granger manhandle his son, dragging him like a criminal. He heard Elena's voice faintly protesting, only to be silenced by Calloway's threats. And then he saw Daniel, standing tall despite the humiliation. His voice steady. "You're humiliating a man who's done nothing but his job." The coffee went cold. Samuel leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing. He had seen injustice in countless forms throughout his career. Corrupt officials, prejudiced officers, entire institutions weaponizing power against the powerless. But seeing his own son treated this way ignited a storm beneath his calm exterior. He did not act impulsively. That was not Samuel's way. Instead, he picked up the phone and called one of his most trusted deputies. "Agent Turner," he said evenly, "I need you to come by the house tonight. There's something we need to review." By the time Agent Lisa Turner arrived, Samuel had already set up a secure laptop on the kitchen table, the video cued and ready. He played it for her, his expression unreadable. Turner, a seasoned agent with 20 years in the bureau, leaned forward as the recording ended. "That's your son?" "Yes," Samuel replied quietly, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Calloway just made the biggest mistake of his life." Samuel didn't answer right away. He folded his hands, deep in thought. Finally he said, "This isn't just about Daniel. This is about a culture. Calloway believes people like my son are invisible, disposable. That mindset doesn't spring from one man. It festers in systems." Turner nodded. "So what's our move?" "We build carefully," Samuel said. "No anger, no rash retaliation. We'll gather evidence. We'll let Calloway dig his own grave. And when the time is right, the truth will speak louder than any of his threats." Meanwhile, Daniel sat in the basement of Orion Technologies, tired but unbroken. He had no idea that his father had already seen the video. He had no idea that the machinery of justice was quietly aligning in his favor. Chad checked on him intermittently, throwing taunts like daggers. "Your kind never lasts here. Should have stayed in your place." Daniel ignored him, repeating his father's words in his head. "Stand tall, even when others try to make you small." Back at Samuel's home, Turner reviewed employee records, corporate filings, and complaints tied to Orion Technologies. What they found was telling. Dozens of internal HR grievances buried, multiple settlements sealed by non-disclosure agreements, and a pattern of complaints disproportionately involving minority employees. "This is bigger than one incident," Turner remarked. "This is a corporate culture of discrimination and cover-ups." Samuel nodded grimly. "Exactly. And Calloway is arrogant enough to think he's untouchable. That arrogance will be his undoing." He leaned back, a faint glimmer of steel in his eyes. "Tomorrow morning, we go to Orion Technologies. I won't storm in shouting. I'll walk in quietly, and when I speak, they'll understand what it means to underestimate my son." But before the confrontation, Samuel made one more call, this time to Daniel's phone. When his son answered, his voice was weary but steady. "Dad?" "I've seen the video," Samuel said. A long silence stretched between them. Finally, Daniel whispered, "I didn't want you to know like this. I wanted to handle it on my own." "You did handle it," Samuel replied gently. "You stood tall." "I'm proud of you," Daniel's voice cracked. "They treated me like I was nothing." "You are never nothing," Samuel said firmly. "Not to me. Not to anyone who truly sees you. Remember that. Tonight they tried to break you. Tomorrow they'll see who you really are." Daniel closed his eyes, letting the words sink in. For the first time that night, he felt the weight on his chest lighten. Samuel hung up and turned to Turner. His calm demeanor remained, but underneath it pulsed a quiet resolve, as dangerous as it was unshakable. "Calloway believes he humiliated a janitor," Samuel said. "Tomorrow, he'll learn that Janitor is the son of the FBI director. And then we'll see how brave he feels." In the sterile basement of Orion Technologies, Daniel sat in silence, unaware that the tide had already begun to turn. Upstairs, Calloway was still celebrating his power, convinced his authority was absolute. But outside those glass walls, forces were already moving. Quiet, strategic, unstoppable, and when dawn came, the tables would begin to turn. By sunrise, Samuel Brooks was already in motion. His calm demeanor belied the storm of planning taking shape in his mind. Years in the FBI had taught him that justice was rarely served in loud, explosive moments. True justice was built brick by brick, with evidence, patience, and precision. At headquarters, Samuel convened a discreet meeting with Agent Lisa Turner and a handful of trusted staff. The conference room was dimly lit, the blinds drawn to shield them from prying eyes. "Last night wasn't an isolated incident," Samuel began, sliding Elena's recording across the table. "This is symptomatic of a deeper culture at Orion Technologies. We'll treat it as we would any systemic corruption case. Build a foundation so solid they can't wriggle free." Turner nodded, opening her laptop. "I've already started compiling records. HR complaints, discrimination lawsuits, settlements hidden behind NDAs. It's a pattern, and it's ugly." Another agent added, "If we pull subpoenaed payroll and hiring data, we can show disparities in promotions and terminations too." "That'll connect the dots." Samuel's eyes sharpened. "Good, keep it quiet for now. Calloway thrives on intimidation. The less he knows, the deeper he digs his own hole." Meanwhile, inside Orion Technologies, Richard Calloway strutted into the boardroom as if the night before had been a triumph. His executives sat stiffly around the polished table, most too wary to challenge him. "Ladies and gentlemen," Calloway announced, "we had a disturbance last night. A janitor who thought he could challenge my authority. But rest assured, I handled it. He's being processed out as we speak." Some executives nodded dutifully, but others shifted uncomfortably. A few of them had witnessed Calloway's temper before and knew that his ego often led him into reckless decisions. Still, no one dared to voice it aloud. Victoria Hale sat quietly, reviewing her tablet. Though she wore her usual professional mask, her instincts told her the situation was volatile. Calloway's confidence felt misplaced. That janitor hadn't seemed ordinary. And if Elena Martinez had indeed recorded the incident, the fallout could be catastrophic. Later that afternoon, Elena and Derek met in a quiet diner across town. Elena slid her phone across the table, the video cued. Derek watched silently, his jaw tightening as Calloway's words echoed, "People like him don't belong in my offices." Derek shook his head. "Man's been sitting up in that tower so long, he thinks the world is his kingdom. But Daniel isn't alone in this. I've seen too many nights where the staff got pushed around, disrespected, ignored. This ain't new. It just finally got caught on tape." Eleanor's voice was steady, though her hands trembled. "I've already sent the video somewhere safe. If anything happens to me, it won't disappear." Derek studied her, pride flickering in his tired eyes. "You're braver than you think." Neither of them knew that the video was already in the hands of the FBI. At Bureau headquarters, Agent Turner dug deeper into Orion's operations. What she uncovered was startling. "Director," she said, placing a stack of reports on Samuel's desk, "they've been systematically burying complaints. Minority staff disproportionately terminated, disciplinary records doctored, and HR instructed to erase incidents that could tarnish the company's reputation. This isn't just bias, it's deliberate." Samuel's expression didn't change, but his eyes hardened. "We'll need whistleblowers. People who can corroborate this, beyond the paperwork." Turner nodded. "I've already flagged potential witnesses. Derek Moore, longtime janitor. Elena Martinez, assistant. Both were present last night. If they're willing, their testimonies could dismantle Calloway's narrative. Samuel paused, considering. Approach them carefully. Make sure they feel safe. Calloway will tighten his grip if he suspects what's coming. Sure enough, Calloway was already moving to protect himself. That evening, he summoned Chadwick Granger and Victoria Hale into his office. We need to contain this, he snapped. If that janitor or anyone spreads lies about last night, it dies here, Chad grinned. Want me to scare him off? Not just him, Calloway said coldly. Anyone who tries to back him up. They'll be reminded who runs this company. Victoria's stomach twisted. She had played her part in covering scandals before, but something about this one felt dangerous. Richard, she began cautiously, you should tread lightly. If this leaks, public opinion could turn fast. One video is all it takes. Then make sure the video never sees the light of day, Calloway snapped. Do whatever it takes. Victoria nodded outwardly, but inside her doubts deepened. Back at home, Daniel sat at the kitchen table with his father. His shoulders were heavy with the weight of humiliation, but Samuel studied him with quiet pride. You didn't break, Samuel said. Daniel shook his head. I wanted to. For a second, I almost begged. But then I thought of you, of everything you've taught me. Samuel reached across the table, gripping his son's hand firmly. You don't need my title to have power. You showed more strength in that moment than Calloway has in his entire career. Daniel's eyes glistened. So what happens now? Samuel leaned back, his voice calm but resolute. Now we build. We gather the truth piece by piece. And when it's ready, we won't just clear your name. We'll reveal the rot inside Orion Technologies for everyone to see. By the week's end, the investigation was quietly underway. Subpoenas were drafted. Witnesses were discreetly contacted. And in the shadows of his own arrogance, Richard Calloway continued to believe he had won. He didn't know that the very foundation beneath his empire was being dismantled, one brick at a time, and when it collapsed, it would be loud enough for the entire world to hear. Richard Calloway was not a man used to losing. When problems arose, he buried them under money, contracts, or threats. To him, last Friday's confrontation was nothing more than another mess to clean up, a blip that could be silenced before anyone noticed. He summoned Victoria Hale and Chadwick Granger to his penthouse office late. Monday evening, the city skyline glittered behind him as he poured himself a drink, his mood simmering with arrogance. This janitor, Brooks, Calloway said, swirling his glass, he's a liability. If we let this fester, it could spiral. I want it handled, quietly. Chad leaned forward eagerly. Say the word and I'll scare him off. Make sure he never shows his face again. But Victoria wasn't as quick to agree. She tapped her tablet, scanning the notes she'd compiled. Richard, there's a bigger risk here. That assistant, Elena Martinez, was in the room. If she recorded anything... She won't, Calloway interrupted sharply. She needs her paycheck too badly to cross me. Victoria frowned. Don't be so sure. People are unpredictable when they see injustice up close. If she has something, we can't just rely on fear. We need leverage. Or silence. Calloway smirked, setting his glass down with a sharp clink. Then buy her silence. Offer her a promotion, a bonus, whatever it takes. Everyone has a price. The next morning, Elena was called to Victoria's office. The PR chief greeted her with a polished smile, gesturing toward a chair. Elena, you've been such a valuable asset to Orion. Your dedication doesn't go unnoticed, Victoria began smoothly. Elena sat cautiously, clutching her notebook. She could feel the undercurrent in the room, the unspoken tension. Victoria slid a folder across the desk. Inside, you'll find a revised contract. Significant raise, new title, Executive Coordinator. All yours on one condition. Elena opened the folder, her stomach churning. At the bottom of the contract was a non-disclosure agreement, tightly worded to erase any mention of incidents involving Orion Technologies staff or executives. Her heart pounded. This was it, the bribe. The price of her silence. Victoria leaned in, her voice low and persuasive. Think about your future, Eleanor. Stability, advancement, security, or you can risk it all on a janitor who won't even be here next week. Elena closed the folder quietly, her expression unreadable. "I'll think about it," she said, standing to leave, but inside, her decision was already made. She would not be bought. Meanwhile, Derek Moore received his own form of intimidation. Chad cornered him in the basement one evening, looming over the older janitor as he changed out of his uniform. "You're close with Brooks," Chad said, his tone dripping with menace. "Word is you've been talking. Let me give you some advice, old man. Keep your mouth shut if you want to keep collecting paychecks." Derek met his gaze steadily. "Been mopping floors longer than you've been barking orders." "I'm not afraid of you, son." Chad leaned closer, voice a growl. "Maybe you should be." He slammed a locker shut, the sound echoing through the basement before storming out. Derek exhaled slowly, his hands trembling slightly. He had faced intimidation before, but this was different. This was desperation, and desperation meant Calloway was rattled. That same night, Victoria placed a call to a familiar contact at the local police precinct. "Chief Daniels," she purred, "I hear you're up for re-election soon. Orion would love to contribute to your campaign. But first, I need a small favor." Within hours, a police report was quietly drafted, accusing Daniel Brooks of disruptive behavior and refusing lawful orders at Orion Technologies. The document was vague, but enough to cast doubt if it ever went public. Victoria sent the draft to Calloway, who smiled smugly. "Perfect. If Brooks or his sympathizers try to make noise, we paint him as a troublemaker." Case closed. What Calloway didn't know was that the FBI already had eyes on his every move. Agent Turner, monitoring communications and financial flows tied to Orion, flagged the sudden contact with the precinct as suspicious. "Director," she told Samuel Brooks the next morning, "Calloway is trying to fabricate a paper trail. He's using the police to smear Daniel's name." Samuel's expression remained calm, though his jaw tightened. "Good. Every false step he takes only strengthens our case." Elena met with Derek later that week in the diner again. Sliding the NDA folder onto the table, "They tried to buy me off," she said, her voice trembling with both fear and anger. "A raise, a promotion, all I had to do was pretend none of it happened." Derek shook his head. "That's how they've kept people quiet all these years. Fear and bribes." Elena looked him in the eye. "I won't be silent, Derek. Not this time." Unknown to her, a quiet figure at the counter listened carefully, Agent Turner sipping coffee blending into the crowd. She smiled faintly. The courage of ordinary people was often the strongest weapon of all. By Friday, Calloway believed he had contained the situation. Elena hadn't spoken. Derek hadn't gone public. And the doctored police report was ready if needed. Standing in his office, overlooking the city, he told Victoria confidently, "See, problem solved. They all fall in line eventually." Victoria nodded, but her gut told her otherwise. She had seen cracks forming, the janitor's calm defiance, Elena's hesitation to sign, Derek's quiet strength. She couldn't shake the feeling that something larger was building, out of sight. And she was right, because in a quiet FBI office across town, Samuel Brooks reviewed the latest evidence, bribe attempts, intimidation tactics, and now a falsified police report. Piece by piece, Calloway was weaving his own noose. Samuel closed the file and looked at Turner. He thinks he's silenced them. What he doesn't realize is that they're stronger than he ever imagined. And soon will give them the platform to speak. The attempted cover-up wasn't burying the truth. It was amplifying it, and the louder it became, the harder the fall would be. The boardroom of Orion Technologies had never been so crowded. Executives lined the long mahogany table, their faces tense. Security officers stood at the walls, arms folded, trying to project control. Cameras from local news outlets pointed toward the front, their red lights blinking, ready to capture everything. Richard Calloway stood at the head of the table, radiating false confidence. He had called this emergency meeting to set the record straight after rumors began swirling in the press about an altercation involving a janitor. His plan was simple: deny, deflect, and dismiss. "Ladies and gentlemen," Calloway began smoothly, "what you've heard in the media is nothing more than exaggeration. A disgruntled employee tried to disrupt operations, and we acted accordingly. Orion remains committed to professionalism." His words hung in the air, polished but hollow. The doors to the boardroom opened. Silence fell as Director Samuel Brooks entered, his presence commanding the entire space. He was flanked by Agent Lisa Turner and two other FBI officials. Calloway's confident mask cracked for a fraction of a second. "And you are?" he asked, trying to sound unfazed. Samuel's voice was calm, steady. "Samuel Brooks, Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation." The room froze. Every executive shifted in their seat. Every camera tilted to capture the moment. Calloway blinked, his smirk faltering. "What possible business does the FBI have with Orion Technologies?" Samuel placed a folder on the table. "I'm here on behalf of my son, Daniel Brooks, the janitor you ordered arrested, and on behalf of every employee you've silenced, threatened, or discarded." Gasps rippled through the room. Calloway's jaw tightened. "Your son?" "He was trespassing." "Enough," Samuel interrupted, his tone like steel. "We have recordings of you ordering his unlawful detainment. We have testimonies from employees who witnessed it. And we have evidence of systemic discrimination buried under NDAs and intimidation. Would you like me to play the footage for everyone here?" Without waiting for permission, Turner set a laptop on the table and pressed play. The recording filled the room. Calloway's voice dripping with contempt. "This man doesn't belong here. Arrest him. People like him don't belong in my offices." The words echoed like a bombshell. Executives shifted uncomfortably, some looking away in shame. Elena Martinez, seated near the back, raised her hand timidly. "I was there. I saw everything. Daniel was just doing his job." Derek Moore stood next, his voice steady but firm. "This isn't the first time. I've worked here for 20 years. I've seen staff written up for nothing, pushed out because they didn't fit the image Calloway wanted. We've all been afraid to speak until now." The cameras zoomed in on their faces, their words broadcast live. Calloway's composure shattered. He slammed his hand on the table. "This is nonsense. They're lying!" "You think anyone will believe janitors and assistants over the CEO of Orion Technologies?" Samuel's gaze didn't waver. "They don't have to believe words alone. We have documents, records, and whistleblowers. The truth is no longer buried, Mr. Calloway. It's here in this room, for the world to see." Victoria Hale, the PR chief, sat pale and silent. She had seen Calloway bluff through scandals before, but this was different. The evidence was irrefutable. The witnesses were credible, and the presence of the FBI made it clear that this wasn't just about public image. It was about accountability. Calloway turned toward her, desperate. "Do something. Spin this. Shut it down." Victoria shook her head slowly. For once, she couldn't. The executives began murmuring among themselves, the foundation of Calloway's authority crumbling. For years, they had looked the other way, complicit in silence. But now, in front of cameras and federal officials, the tide had shifted. Samuel rose to his full height, his voice carrying over the chaos. "This is bigger than one incident. Orion Technologies has operated on arrogance and intimidation for too long. My son stood tall when you tried to break him. And now others are standing tall too. This is the beginning of change." The cameras captured every word, broadcasting them live across the city. Calloway's face turned crimson. He jabbed a finger toward Daniel, who had quietly entered the room during the testimony. "You!" Calloway snarled. "You think you've won because your father is powerful? You're still nothing. A janitor. A nobody." Daniel stepped forward calmly, his voice steady, cutting through the CEO's rage. "No, Mr. Calloway, I'm a man who works hard, a man who treats people with respect, and that's something you'll never understand." The room erupted in applause. Staff, executives, even reporters. The applause drowned out Calloway's sputtering protests. Agent Turner closed the folder in front of her. "Mr. Calloway, you are now under federal investigation. I suggest you cooperate." Calloway opened his mouth to protest, but the cameras had already captured his downfall. His empire of intimidation was collapsing in real time, and the whole city was watching. For the first time in his career, Richard Calloway realized he was no longer in control, and Daniel Brooks, The janitor he had tried to humiliate had become the spark that unraveled his empire. The confrontation in Orion Technologies' boardroom sent shockwaves far beyond the glass walls of the skyscraper. Within hours, clips of Richard Calloway ordering Daniel Brooks's arrest were on every major news station. The footage showed the CEO's icy glare, the stunned silence of executives, and Daniel's calm refusal to be humiliated. Social media exploded with outrage. The hashtag Justice for Daniel trending nationwide. What began as the humiliation of one janitor was quickly revealed to be something much larger. The FBI investigation moved with remarkable speed. Within days, subpoenas unearthed a mountain of suppressed complaints. Minority employees consistently denied promotions. Women silenced after reporting harassment. Whistleblowers paid off with settlements buried under thick layers of NDAs. The picture that emerged was not of a company leading in innovation, but of an empire that used its power to crush dissent. Reporters smelled blood. Investigative journalists dug deeper, uncovering stories that mirrored Daniel's. A former engineer described being told she was unfit for leadership, despite spearheading two of the company's most profitable projects. A receptionist shared how she'd been written up for attitude after questioning an executive's inappropriate remarks. A technician revealed that his warnings about faulty hardware were ignored, then erased, because fixing the problem would delay a product launch. Each testimony painted Orion as a toxic empire, built not on vision and ingenuity, but on fear, silence, and exploitation. The city, once proud of Orion's gleaming tower, began to view it as a monument to corruption. Where once the building was a beacon of economic success, it now stood as a symbol of betrayal. Inside the FBI offices, Samuel Brooks reviewed the growing case file with his partner. "Agent Turner, this isn't just Calloway," Turner remarked, flipping through thick folders. Victoria Hale funneled company funds into hush settlements. Chadwick Granger coordinated intimidation against employees. Even the board members signed off on policies designed to quietly push people out. Samuel nodded, his face unreadable. "That's the rot I expected." Calloway was the face, but corruption like this doesn't survive without enablers. "We'll hold them all accountable," Turner smirked faintly, closing one file. Funny thing is, they thought silencing Daniel would bury the problem. Instead, he became the match that lit the fire. At Orion's headquarters, panic spread like wildfire. Chadwick Granger tried to rally the security team, urging them to close ranks. But many guards had seen enough. Several came forward, admitting they had been ordered to rough up or intimidate employees at Calloway's request. The walls of secrecy that Orion relied upon were crumbling from within. Victoria Hale attempted damage control, calling emergency meetings and drafting public statements. But the evidence against her was overwhelming. Emails revealed she had orchestrated payouts to silence harassment victims. When cornered by reporters outside her luxury apartment, she muttered only one phrase, "No comment," before fleeing inside. Within 48 hours, she resigned under pressure. The board of directors, once content to enjoy their profits and ignore the inner workings of the company, scrambled to distance themselves from Calloway. But recordings surfaced of meetings where members dismissed concerns about diversity initiatives as a waste of resources. Public outrage demanded blood. One by one, board members stepped down in disgrace. Their names tarnished forever. The ripple effects reached employees who had long kept silent. Empowered by Daniel's courage and Samuel's presence, dozens of staff members came forward. Town halls were held in the lobby of Orion's skyscraper, where janitors, assistants, and mid-level managers shared their stories publicly. One evening, Derek Moore stood at the microphone, his voice steady, though his hands trembled slightly. "For 20 years, I've mopped these floors and kept my head down. I've watched good people pushed out while the worst were promoted. But no more. Respect doesn't come from a title. It comes from how you treat people. And for too long, this company forgot that." The crowd erupted in applause, some clapping with tears in their eyes. For the first time in Orion's history, the workers' voices were louder than the board's. The city itself began to respond. Lawmakers proposed stricter oversight on corporate NDAs. Advocacy groups launched campaigns demanding worker protections, using Orion as the rallying cry. Universities invited Daniel to speak about resilience and dignity in the workplace, framing him not just as a victim, but as a catalyst for reform. For Daniel, the attention was overwhelming. He never sought to be a symbol. He only wanted to work with dignity. But as he walked through the city streets, strangers stopped him to shake his hand. "You reminded us that we're not powerless," one woman told him softly. "Thank you." Richard Calloway, meanwhile, faced the collapse of everything he had built. His fortune dwindled as investors pulled out. Share prices plummeted. The board officially voted him out as CEO, citing irreparable damage to Orion's reputation. Worse still, the FBI pressed charges for unlawful detainment, workplace discrimination, and corporate fraud uncovered in the investigation. The empire he had ruled with arrogance was dismantling piece by piece, and this time there would be no golden parachute. When Calloway finally appeared in court, his once imposing figure looked diminished. The tailored suits could not hide the slump of his shoulders. Gone was the confident smirk, replaced by a man cornered by the very system he thought he controlled. Cameras captured his arrival, and the image was broadcast everywhere. The mighty CEO, humbled at last. In contrast, Daniel sat quietly beside his father during a press conference at FBI headquarters. Cameras flashed, microphones crowded forward. Samuel addressed the nation with calm authority. "This is not just about my son," he began. "It's about every worker who has been told they are invisible. It's about every person silenced by intimidation." Daniel's dignity exposed a system that thrives on fear. "And together we proved that fear can be broken." He paused, glancing at Daniel. "Justice is not a gift from the powerful. It's a right that belongs to us all." The words struck a chord across the country. Families gathered around televisions. Workers whispered about their own workplaces. And countless people shared the speech online, vowing to demand better where they worked. Back at Orion, change was already beginning. Interim leadership was installed, with a mandate to rebuild the company's culture from the ground up. Whistleblowers were reinstated. Policies were rewritten to protect employees. And in the lobby, a new plaque was unveiled, mounted in polished steel. "This building belongs to every worker who steps inside. Respect is not optional. It is the foundation." For the first time in years, employees walked the halls with heads held high. As Daniel stood in the lobby one evening, Elena approached him, smiling faintly. "You realize," she said, "you started this." Daniel shook his head. "No, we all did. I just refused to bow." Derek joined them, his voice warm. "Sometimes that's all it takes. One person standing tall, and the rest remember how." Daniel glanced upward, the gleaming tower no longer feeling like a cage, but a symbol of transformation. The empire that once sought to crush him had fallen, and from its ruins something better was rising. 1 year had passed since the boardroom confrontation that toppled Richard Calloway. The glass tower of Orion Technologies still gleamed under the city skyline, but inside the air felt different. Gone was the culture of silence and fear. In its place, a new ethos had begun to grow, one rooted in dignity, transparency, and accountability. The change was not instant. Rebuilding a broken system never is. But step by step, progress was undeniable. The new leadership team, chosen with input from employee committees, created policies that encouraged openness rather than intimidation. NDAs, once used to bury injustice, were rewritten to protect workers instead of executives. In the lobby, the plaque unveiled weeks earlier remained a daily reminder: this building belongs to every worker who steps inside. Respect is not optional. It is the foundation. Employees paused to read it as they arrived each morning. For janitors, assistants, and engineers alike, it was no longer just words. It was a promise. Daniel Brooks still worked at Orion, though his role had changed. No longer confined to the night shift with a mop and cart, he had been invited to join the company's ethics committee. tasked with ensuring the mistakes of the past were never repeated. He accepted humbly, not for prestige, but for purpose. "If my story can help stop someone else from going through what I did," he told the committee on his first day, "then it's worth it." At first, he struggled with the attention. Strangers recognized him on the street, some calling him a hero. Universities invited him to speak. Organizations asked him to sit on panels. But Daniel never let it inflate his ego. "I didn't do anything extraordinary," he said often. "I just refused to bow." Yet that refusal had lit a spark that others carried forward. One afternoon, Elena Martinez stopped by his new office, a modest space with a desk cluttered with files. She smiled, setting down 2 cups of coffee. "Never thought I'd see the day," she said, glancing around. Daniel chuckled. "Neither did I, but here we are." Her expression softened. "You know, if you hadn't stood tall that night, I don't think I would have found the courage to speak out. You gave me, and a lot of others, a voice." Daniel shook his head gently. "You already had a voice, Elena. You just needed a reason to use it." Derek Moore, too, saw the fruits of change. After decades of mopping floors in silence, he was finally recognized, not as just a janitor, but as a veteran employee with wisdom to share. He was offered a mentorship role for younger staff, a position he accepted with pride. "About time they realized experience means something," Derek joked, though his eyes shone with quiet gratitude. For him, Daniel's fight had rewritten not only the company's culture, but his own legacy. Outside Orion, the impact rippled across the city. Inspired by the case, lawmakers passed new regulations limiting the use of NDAs to silence workplace discrimination claims. Advocacy groups used the momentum to push for broader labor protections. The corporations quietly began reviewing their practices, not wanting to become the next Orion scandal. Universities incorporated the story into ethics curricula. Journalists called it a turning point in corporate accountability, and through it all, the image that remained burned into the public's mind was not Calloway's downfall, but Daniel's dignity, his calm defiance in the face of humiliation, his refusal to bow when others tried to strip him of humanity. At home, Samuel Brooks watched it all with quiet pride. He never flaunted his role in the takedown, never let his position overshadow his son's courage. When reporters asked him about the case, he always redirected the spotlight. "My son stood tall when others tried to make him small," Samuel said in one interview. "That's what this is about. Not power, not titles, but dignity." For all his years in the FBI, Samuel had never been prouder than the night Daniel had refused to break. One evening, Daniel and his father stood together on the steps of Orion's lobby after an employee forum. The city skyline shimmered behind them, the glass tower glowing in the dusk. Daniel looked up at the building. "Funny," he said softly. "For so long, this place felt like a prison. Now it feels different." Samuel placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "Because you changed it. Not by force, not by anger, but by standing firm in who you are." "That's real power, Daniel. The kind no one can take away." Daniel smiled faintly. "I just wanted to do my job. I never wanted all this." His father nodded. "That's why it matters so much. You didn't seek the fight, but when it came, you stood tall. And because of that, others stood with you. That's legacy." Months later, at a public symposium on workplace justice, Daniel addressed a packed auditorium. His words carried the same calm strength that had silenced Calloway months before. "Titles don't make us worthy. Suits, offices, corner desks, none of that defines a person's value. Dignity comes from how we treat each other. And if you ever find yourself being told you're invisible, remember this: you are not. You matter. And when you stand tall, even against the biggest giants, you remind others that they can stand too." The crowd rose to its feet in thunderous applause. Back at Orion Technologies, life continued, desks filled, computers hummed, floors shone. But beneath the surface, something fundamental had shifted. No longer were janitors invisible. No longer were assistants voiceless. Daniel Brooks had proven that respect wasn't optional. It was the foundation, and that truth would echo not just through Orion's glass tower, but through every workplace willing to listen. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.